Thank you so much for that, Javier. For me, it was really interesting to see how Nestle is holding itself accountable, looking at their own contribution to the global food waste and food loss picture. That is, I think, something really refreshing. The nutrition and environment lens that you're using to look at what you're doing is, I think, also impressive. And I personally need to know what that app is that gives you a recipe for your leftovers, because that is a practical, real action. And it was wonderful to see all the collaborators that you're working with really committed and moving forward on this issue. What I'm hoping has happened with all the different presenters, and as we go into the question and answer period, is a real sense of the kinds of collaborations that are possible, the depth and breadth of collaboration that are possible. We have about 15 minutes left for questions. I want to do that in maybe 3 rounds. Madam Commissioner, my brother from Tanzania, number 1, number 2, let me take 3. Any other brother from the back? Okay, let's do that as a first round of questions, directed specifically or generally, and we shall hear responses.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would like to first of all congratulate all the presenters for this rich presentation, which gave us a lot of insight, in terms of this thematic we've been going through since yesterday, the food loss and waste. My question goes just to my neighbor here, left on me. We know Nestle is a very huge enterprise. It's been working a lot in Africa, in our continent, but I didn't see much experience exposed in terms of food loss and waste of Nestle in Africa. You mentioned some example. It was more in Latin America and Asia. I would like to know what really good lessons and example you're doing in Africa in order to scale up with so many countries. And we are more interested in also how you support farmers at the, at the production level. We are interested to look throughout the value chain. It's very important for us because now we're talking about agribusiness, we are talking about agro-industry, so we are going to reach there where, the Western world is already, worried about the waste part of this thematic. But I would like to know, what is Nestle doing at the farm level, at the production level, and throughout scale up in the value chain, and share this good example, those countries that are doing well, with other countries, so that we at the African Union Commission, we will follow it, and me as a champion for 1, 2, 3, I will also follow it with some member countries. We are 55, and it's a lot of work to do, so we really need your experience. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. For the rest of the question askers, I've got a timer here just to keep us moving. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much. This was really an exciting session for me because it really sort of like took forward what I was saying yesterday about the SMEs. So I've got questions for 2 people, Grant as well as Stephen. Let us start with Grant. I just wanted to find 2 things. You mentioned about youth joining in the value chain. What are they joining to do? Which aspects of the value chain are they coming in? And how much of those enterprises are actually dealing with the reduction of waste or loss and waste of the commodities you are dealing with? Because it's very, very important for us to see how we can build that SME youth in the system. Then I want also to just quickly, but we can link this together later on, what type of irrigation is being promoted and what is the mode of delivery of the technology. And then to Stephen, I just wanted to say, maybe you said it, but what kind of knowledge products is the research center producing? And knowledge products that are coming from your research, and how do you get them to the users, and what methods are being used to make sure that they are actually utilized?
Thank you. In the back.
Yeah, I want to thank all the speakers. It's really interesting contributions. especially also the joy of eating from Too Good To Go. And my question is to Stephen. You mentioned a number of $2 billion, and I was wondering if you can give us some more background.
Why don't I add I see two more hands. Let me add two more hands to this round. We'll get answers and then we'll take another round. Del Sola?
Yes, also for Mr. Lapige from Australia, for the beautiful land down under. It's about how do you measure food loss and waste, because I saw 7 million tons, and in my country we have 128 million tons. So are we measuring the same? I think this is an issue very important for everyone to have the same method of measuring.
Thank you. Prof. Joachim?
My question goes to Padmanabha and Steve and Philip. Do we have a global alliance of civil society organizations fighting food waste? If not, how do we get there? If we would look at a map, in which countries are your organizations not present? What are the white spots? We learned yesterday in Nairobi, same waste per capita as in England. So that's the background of my questions.
And I'm going to abuse access to the mic and ask my own question to Gopalan. How are you resourcing your work, and what is the donor landscape for the kind of work that you're doing as a nonprofit? And why don't we take answers in the order that presenters made? Alison, do you have a comment to make into any of the questions that have been asked? And we'll just go in order.
I mean, the question on civil society alliance I thought was a really interesting one, because it's clear that businesses are trying to sort of build sort of global alliances on food loss and waste and across the food system. And I actually think civil society also needs to start sort of collaborate and align in the way that you're talking about, not just on food loss and waste, but across food and nature as well. You can actually see that happening, but I think it could be really compelling if civil society could do that as well and build an alliance.
Yeah, the same. In India, we have formed a Indian Food Recovery Alliance along with the national government and a couple of some 70 other organizations who are involved in food donation. So recently, the national government has launched a policy on food sharing and donation, Indian Food Surplus Food Recovery Act, that is recently launched in this World Food Day. So the alliance is now at a national level. There are some 70 plus organizations working in different parts of the country. They are all coming together for the cause of sharing food, majorly avoiding food waste and sharing the surplus food to the needy people. So this is one alliance we are part of. And for a global alliance, we need more like knowledge sharing from global partners. I think the Global Food Banking Network is already organizing a global alliance with all the network across the globe, and we are learning from best practices from them. And regarding the donor landscape, we have a corporate social responsibility partnerships in local levels. In all the 18 cities we operate, we have created a partnership network in each city. So where each city has a local social capital involved in it. So any successful non-profit activity within the city level should have a successful social capital involved in it. And each city has been tied up with a local social corporate responsibility partner, corporate partners, volunteer partnering network, and also other community organizations to come and join hands with us. That's it.
So on the question of notable products, the CRC deals with products right along the value chain. So at the higher end, I guess we've got nutraceuticals, so taking the nutrients from surplus food and turning them into products with a company called Swiss, which is the biggest vitamin company in the country. There's functional foods, bioplastics from crop residues, for example, bioenergy projects, collagen from fish waste. But I'll mention two just in a little bit more detail. One is grapeseed extract. That's one of the most popular products on the nutraceutical market. We have a reasonable sized wine industry in Australia. We produce 350,000 tonnes of grape marc and grapeseed every year, yet we import 100% of our grapeseed extract from France via China. That makes no sense at all. And so one of our big projects at the moment is establishing that value chain in Australia and trying to support local industries to use their waste. So taking a very industrious approach to waste utilisation. Another project is around compost and building the evidence base of using food waste compost to grow healthier food that we then waste less because it's got longer shelf life and so on. So that's just a touch of the projects that we support. Did you want me to address some of those other questions?
At your leisure. Why don't you take another 2 minutes?
Okay. For Ben, in terms of how that $2 billion was calculated, every CRC, and there's CRCs or cooperative research centres in a whole range of different fields, from biomedical to aeronautical, they all go through this impact tool calculation. It's a 15-year calculation tool that goes in all the major projects calculated in, and then the impacts from those projects. Our tool was audited by KPMG, the global accounting firm, but we do believe our estimates are conservative and our impact can be much higher than that.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, I would address, of course, the question asked by Dr. von Braun. And for us, in terms of global alliances, of course, those global alliances exist, particularly with the work that Greg has done with the Champions 12.3. So we know that when civil society comes together with businesses that exist, etc. But I think where we are still missing the biggest point is also with policymakers, and to make changes happen on the city level, but also with policymakers in the same room. I think, and that's where things are still very slow, and in my opinion, too slow in things going forward. Particularly in our case, and why we have so many white spots, for example, in different countries, and why people are asking us, why are you not in the US, why are you not in Australia, is particularly down to the legal aspects and to the due diligence. Whenever there's a new innovation and when there is something new to a market or a solution, it's always the legal aspect which is a blocking aspect. So I would say that that is the biggest issue in that regard.
Thank you. And Grant.
Youth and education. Youth, I think the primary production is where we can see youth be involved. We can see them involved with jobs and warehousing and distribution and on vehicles and such, but the key bottleneck here is in primary production. And I've never met a young person who tells me I want to be a smallholder farmer. It's not an inspiration of theirs. I met a lot of young people who tell me I want to be a 30, 40, 50 acre farmer, because I know I'm going to make $40,000 a year, $50,000 a year if I know that. Right now, we've stripped the skills building educational systems from our programs to create those would-be farmers. Yeah, the university-based programming has no real-world attachment to it. It's tied to irrigation as well, because the type of irrigation that makes sense to have an impact on post-harvest loss and also the profitability of the farm is reservoir-based, either drip or sprinkler system, depending on the type of commodity you're in. And that really only makes sense above like 12 hectares from how much you spend on a reservoir and pumping, and so it has to be a slightly larger farm, and it means the ticket size needs to be more like $100,000 to build a farm, not a $1,000 smallholder loan. So we need to increase the idea of what a smallholder is to both attract youth into agriculture and to have irrigation systems that make sense for the consumer needs.
And finally, Javier.
Yes, so one of the examples that we're doing in Africa is in Nigeria. We have a very popular cereal brand that is called Golden Morn, which is made from maize. And what we realized is that the reject from the factory was really high, in the order of 17%. And these rejects were done due to the level of mycotoxins and dust. So we have set a clear standards for farmers, so then they can improve the warehousing conditions and making sure that we have people on the ground helping them to follow those standards. And by doing so, now the rejections of maize have dropped to only 4%. Now, on how do we share good practices, we have a Facebook type of a platform for employees where we share the different initiatives that we're doing in the different markets, and also we share them not just internally but also externally through, for example, the work we're doing with the WBCSD and WRI. Now, also another initiative which I think could be interesting for you is that we have realized that 70% of the farmer communities in some countries don't have enough food during the entire year. So we have been running pilots, and one of these pilots is in Kenya, really working with the farmers. So doing cooking demonstration, also encourage them to plant their own kitchen garden, and encourage them also to plant in those vegetables that they can be safe during the winter and that are also rich in nutrients. So one of the examples is amaranth. And what we also have been working with them is reviving different conservation techniques. So for example, in mangoes, they can either dry them or pickle, so then they have them available for winter period.
Thank you so much to all the presenters and all the question askers. I noticed that we are 3 minutes past schedule, so I will gratefully hand the panel back to Professor von Braun with deep apologies for those of you who didn't get a chance to ask questions.
Is there anyone angry? Then takes a moment and still make your point.
Okay, in that case, Betty behind you.
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think my question goes to Grant, and I have two questions. So my first question is on the smallholder farmers. I know you're exiting from the space, directly working with them. So what do you see as a profitable model for sourcing from smallholder farmers who actually produce more than 80% of the produce in Africa? That's my first question. And the second question is maybe more of a comment. I note, I think about 2 weeks or so, you did an advertisement for agencies or agents to source for you on your behalf. And I'm just concerned about how you're going to make sure that you're monitoring the quality and safety and pesticide issues in the value chain. Because initially you had a little bit more control when you're sourcing directly from the farmers through your aggregation centers. But now you'll be waiting for your produce to come to Nairobi. You have no idea where it's coming from. How are you going to build in that food safety mechanism? Thank you.
So I should be clear on smallholder farmers. I don't think we can say we're successful in 20 years if our food systems are still dependent on smallholder farmers. It's a legacy problem, and it's a welfare problem. You can't get a farm to make unit economic sense at 1 or 2 hectares. You can't live a dignified life off the income you can generate from that land. And the alternative, what I'm afraid Twiga is going to become, is an import company if we don't make investments in the alternative of locally, commercially grown food. So the reason we made that call was to be a leader in still having locally grown food. So what becomes of the smallholder farmers directly tied to your next question? It doesn't make commercial sense to go to an increasingly number of smaller and smaller farmers for lower and lower quality produce, where we saw all of our numbers top out. So what we've tried to do is tell communities of smallholder farmers, which was these publications, that if you come together and aggregate, so you can make marketable sense for your product, we'll take it on. And some of those have been, we didn't want to tell people how to solve that problem. So some of those have been co-ops, who have come together and organized to get a minimum of 7 tons of product to our collection centers. Some of them have gone back to brokers who do this. But it has presented a food safety challenge. So what we've done is we put in basically residue testing kits at our pack houses to sample things as they go through, and then also have KEFIS come in and check it. KEFIS is the Kenyan regulator here, to come in and check it on a regular basis, so that we can red flag back to any farmer groups or any brokers that the farmer groups are using to say that we've got a red flag here. But I think this is a part of a multi-year transition that we're making towards a supplier base of SME farmers locally, as opposed to just importing everything. Last year, 80% of our potatoes came from southern Tanzania, 1,200 kilometers away. There, we definitely have no line of sight on who those growers are, let alone have connected consumers to who your produce growers are. That's the alternative we're fighting here, and that's what I want to counter.
Banjiro, let me thank you for your sharing, but let me pester you with a question too. I know on your mind is the role of women in all of this, what we have been discussing yesterday and today. And here you have been chairing a session with specialized NGOs and food business on how to cut waste and losses. How about women's organizations, general women's organizations, to rope them into this fight against food waste and losses? Don't we have an opportunity to cast the net wider? For instance, in my home country, one of the largest organizations is a women farmers organization, socially active and so on. They're even bigger than the German soccer football organization. I'm not going there, I mean to soccer and football, but what's your reaction? How can the mobilization of women's organizations serve this cause?
Thanks, Prof. I'm going to have to think on my feet here, but I would actually widen your question into a much bigger question about in what ways do we see and not see women across the entirety of the story we've told over the last day and a half. In what ways do we see and not see women in production? Do we see women's labor? I've sat here and cringed at moments when we've described the farmer as a he. He does this, he needs this, he wants this. There's nowhere on the African continent you're going that you're not finding women at the very center of agricultural production. Certainly of processing, home-based processing. And so to me, to the extent that we fail to see women in those spaces, then we're telling literally only half the story of the work that needs to be done. And different kinds of women, including women as small business owners, and I appreciated Grant talking about the mama mboga. That's tend to be women, vegetable sellers on the side of the road, and their role. How do we see them and their role in post-harvest loss management? At the end of the day, for much of the continent, in urban spaces, it is the women market sellers in whose hands, that's who handles post-harvest loss. Those market sellers, those women, literally that is who touches that waste. And to the extent that we think we can have these conversations as technical conversations, as policy conversations, as company conversations, but not as people conversations, then I think we're only having half of the conversation. The work that I do with women scientists, including Dr. Ambuko, who's right across from me, in supporting and increasing the number and access to leadership that women scientists have, I think is also into the conversation, into providing solutions, is also part of that. And For me, I think it's not because women are special and deserve special treatment. It is that if we have a problem to solve and we only bring the talents and the wisdom of half of the population, we will only solve the problem halfway. So for me, it's an efficiency question as well. It's an efficacy question.
Well, let me leave you with two thoughts going for lunch. One is a specific one which I would like to address to the corporate sector, the business sector. Maybe all big food companies need not just a food waste and loss officer, but an ombudsperson or ombudswoman or man who really takes things to heart and thinks internally and externally of the company. So that the facts are known and that the opportunities to cut waste and losses, cutting across hierarchies of the market folks, product design folks, the storage and logistics people and so on. Somebody needs to look across. And maybe that's something which some companies have already, but this is not the environmental person only or the nutrition and efficiency person. So that's one thought. Secondly, I would like to link back to our previous session, the one on religious and moral issues which we had, and link it to what we have just heard. I'm quite upbeat about the session which we just have heard. It was full of harmony, big island of consensus between civil society organizations and corporate people here. Maybe we have a selection bias here, but I don't want to assume that. I want to remain positive. And this was very much in line of what you, Marcelo, said earlier. We can act together and we must act together. And that opportunity, with that spirit, I think we need to also follow up to our conference after lunch. Thank you.